In this video, we are going to see how we can make procedural UVs with geometry nodes. So I have this single mesh, which has a kind of a complex shapes, and then a sphere and a cylinder. First thing, I'm going to make a material so I can preview my UVs. So I'm just going to add an image texture, new, going to call it grid, and I'm going to choose UV grid on the generated type. All right. So I already have some previous UVs, but I'm just going to destroy them, like so. And we are going to make our own UVs. First, I'm going to change the preview type of this, so it's a bit more clear, right? And then let's add a geometry nodes. Let's call it procedural UVs. Let me mark it like that, right? So let's say we add a UV unwrap node, and we want to store this data into our mesh. For that, we need a store name attribute node, which we are going to connect to our geometry and to the output. And this sort of purple triangle means it's a vector, so we are going to connect it to the value of the node and set the data type to vector. Now UVs are stored in what's called a face corner, so we are going to change point to face corner. And we also need to give a name to our procedural UVs. I don't know how to override the actual UV map of the mesh yet. If you have any ideas, please leave it on the comment. But for now, we just need to make a new attribute. So I'm going to name it procedural UVs, click enter. And right now, in name attributes, we are now writing this data from the UV unwrap in our mesh. Now we are still not using this data, so let's go back into our shader. And in here, let's search for attribute, and let's put the same name of our custom attribute and put it in here. All right. Now, for some reason, I don't know if it's a Blender bug, but when you are in flat shaded and the solid view, you will not be able to preview this custom vector. So we need to go into render view. All right. And in here, I just have it in the render pass in diffuse color, so it's a bit clearer. Now, as you can see, this looks pretty bad, doesn't make any sense. So what we need to do is to mark the seams. Now, in my case, I want to mark a seam basically on the sharp corners of our mesh. So for that, I can get the edge angle, right? And here we have an unsigned angle and a signed angle. This basically means if you want a negative or positive value, depending if the angle is to the left or the right. In this case, we don't really care to what side the angle is. We just want to know how sharp the edge is. So we can use unsigned angle. Now we are going to take this greater than, and let's say I want to select the edges that have an angle greater than this number. Now, in my case, I prefer to work on degrees, but this value is currently on radians, so we need to use 2 radians. All right. I'm just going to connect this here. And this means that now, if I put 30 in here, it's going to take 30 degrees, convert it into radians, and it's going to use that value. And now we are starting to see a more promising result. So right now, I'm also going to extract this degree value as an input, so I can modify it from here. And let me go back into the shader, and in here, I'm going to put a vector math in our procedural UVs attributes, go to multiply, and this way I can basically make the UV style, so I can see a little bit better what's going on. And this seems pretty decent in here, but of course we have some issues on shapes like cylinders or spheres, because we are simply just cutting a seam on the sharp angles. But in this case, on this cylindrical shape or on the sphere, we don't really have those sort of angles that we can really cut a seam from. So what we want to do is to essentially also allow to manually mark seams on specific shapes that we need. For that, let's add a named attribute node. And in here, if you click here, you will see that we have the UV seam attribute. So now, if I take this, it's going to take those seams. But of course, we don't want to override our data from the sharp angles. So let's go back. And what we want to do is to use a Boolean operator in here, which is going to be the OR operator. And this means that it's going to use both. Right, so let's move this here. There we go. And now let's mark some seams for the sphere. And this is looking a lot better. So now I can modify the shape, mark a seam here, and it's looking pretty promising. All right, so that's cool. Next thing, we also want to pack these UVs. So we have another node to pack to view islands, right? And in here we can define a margin and also the method that we want to pack our islands. But let's say I want to preview how these islands are looking. So what I'm going to do is to add a split edges node in here. And I'm going to add a switch. In one part is going to go the mesh that has the split edges. Actually, let me flip it. Let's do this, all right? So when the switch is on, we are going to use the split edges. When it's off, we are going to choose use our normal mesh. Now, when we have the split edges, we can do set position. And in here, I can also take the vector out of the UV map and set it to position. And that is creating a big mess in there. I need to switch split edges. But the issue is that we are now, of course, splitting the edges of every face, which we don't want. What we want to split the edges, we want to take basically our seams data, and that goes into the selection of split edges. And this is basically our seams. Now, of course, I'm still setting the position even if the switch is off. So what I'm going to do is to use a mix vector. And this basically allows us to set one vector and another vector, and this value will essentially interpolate between those vectors. So for the vector B, I'm going to take the position of our UVs, and for vector A, I'm going to set the position of the original mesh. So now let's say I put this into the position, and I can switch like so. But of course, this is still a mess if I'm using the original mesh, right? To fix this, let me just bring the group input and let's extract this as a variable. And now let me just say that if this factor is greater than 0, then we are going to use the split edges, right? So now when this is 0, we should be using our original non-split mesh. But when it's greater than 0, it's going to split the mesh, and then we can interpolate between the original mesh and the final UV positions, right? Control H is going to hide the inputs that we are not using in here. And let me just organize this a little bit. Like so. So this is pretty nice. We can now preview our UVs. Final thing, group input. And I'm also going to extract the margin of the UV packing, right? So I can now increase this. And that is going to increase the margin size between the islands of the UVs. All right, let's put this back to 0. And that's basically it. That's how you can get a procedural UVs geometry nodes in Blender. You can then mark this as an asset and you can reuse it in other scenes. So I hope you found this useful. I will see you in the next video. If you want to support the channel while improving your 3D workflow, you can get my latest Blender add-on Lucero, which will help you to light, composite, and render your scenes quickly. Check the link in the description for an exclusive 20% discount. If you want to learn something new, feel free to check my courses. I have courses to help you become a great pixel artist or to teach you how to make stylized game textures for your models. Check the links in the description for an exclusive discount.